So today I'm going to be mostly speaking about what DBCA has been and is continuing to do across the whole Nyarri Capes Marine Park. And this includes a lot of the seagrass work that you've just heard Kath speak about, but I'm going to talk about a few other things as well. But I also wanted to take the opportunity to introduce myself a little bit. I am pretty new to the role, and I've just finished up my PhD at UWA. And my background is in kelp forest ecology and seaweed, and fish are my real interests. So you're going to see quite a few photos of those, even though I am meant to be chatting seagrass. And these boxes here kind of just show the spread of my work so far, and you can see it really stretches from these really tropical all the way through to the really temperate or the cool water systems that we have in Western Australia. And this is because basically this is where seaweeds are found, and that's what I want to go looking for. And all of this research is seaweed or kelp forest driven, but ultimately it is focused around this Great Southern Reef that we have. Now this is a reef system that stretches across the southern half of our country. It's interconnected, it's diverse, it's epic, but somehow no one knows about it. If I ask someone, what is the coolest reef system we have in Australia? 99% of you are going to tell me the Great Barrier Reef, but I disagree. So this reef system, it's defined by the presence of golden kelp, so that's the main kelp species that we get in Australia. And it goes across our whole southern coastline. It's interconnected, it really is one massive ecosystem. And words really don't do this place justice. I want to take you guys on a super quick dive into what you might see if you go for a snorkel across the Great Southern Reef. And I'm aware that we've got some whale talks coming up, so it's some stiff competition, but I think, well, I'm hoping that you'll be impressed. So this Great Southern Reef, it's dominated by these kelp forests. They are lush, they're thick, and they really provide the food and the shelter and the habitat to everything that lives within it. And it has these really incredible levels of biodiversity. So they actually surpass places like the Great Barrier Reef by a very significant amount. And these, many of the species that we find here are super unique. They are found nowhere else across the globe. And it's colourful and diverse and absolutely jam-packed full of life, which are characteristics that many people only associate with coral reefs. But for 70% of Australians, the Great Southern Reef is their closest marine ecosystem. It's their local place. It is places like this that is literally on the majority of people's doorsteps, but they have no idea that it exists. But the scientific community do. We've known about it for a little while. We recognise its significance, and we recognise that there are places within the Great Southern Reef that are particularly important, and that's places like the Nyarri Capes Marine Park. So even though this marine park is relatively new, we still have some pretty cool monitoring programs that we've started, and there's two that I'm going to talk about today. The first is our finfish, and then I'll get on to the seagrasses, which I'm meant to be talking about. So the way these monitoring programs work, we look at the asset or the indicator, which in this case is the fish, and we also look at the pressures that are acting upon this indicator. And we assess the condition of these indicators versus the pressure, and that's how we kind of evaluate how well they're doing and evaluate how well we're managing them. So to monitor fish, we use a video system called a stereo BREL, or a stereo baited remote underwater video. It's basically a couple cameras in a frame that we drop to the bottom of the ocean, and we put some bait in front of it, and you'll probably hear a bit more about this from Tim when he speaks later today as well. And this program that we have is a massive collaboration with UWA and Fisheries and a few other key players, but we have about 10 years of data spread across the entire Nyarri Capes Marine Park, and mostly focused on that west coast. These go across the sanctuary zones that were only recently gazetted, so I'm not going to present inside versus outside sanctuary zones today because they're too new. But what this means is because we have this before data, now moving forward we can really accurately assess how well these sanctuary zones are doing. Because these are no-take places, and we can see really clearly the effect that this is going to have on our fish communities. So this is the kind of data we get. I tried to think, what is the most relevant part of this fish data that you guys might be interested in? So I pulled out the target species that everyone likes to eat. So moral of the Cape story, feeding off what Kath said, is everything is pretty stable. We are super lucky, we have quite a healthy ecosystem here, and that is reflected not just in the shallow seagrass sites that Kath was talking about, but it's reflected in our fish communities, it's reflected in our other seagrass data, which I'll touch on later. But yeah, moral of the story is stability, which is really cool. So I pulled out a few fish species, like our foxfish and our snapper, which is actually increasing a little bit, which is kind of cool. The same with our dewies and morgongs, morwongs, and our black-ass cods. Everything is looking really nice and stable, which I hope is good news to the fishes. Another way that we split up this kind of data is looking at what we call community composition. So, for example, on the top left, you've got the opiscivores, so this is big fish that eat other fish. Invertebrores, slightly smaller fish that eat inverts, etc., etc. And we split the data up this way, which again is showing very, very stable communities, but we split it up this way so we can start to look at pressures that could be acting on different parts of the community. So, for example, if you think of fishing pressure, this is likely to affect our piscivores, so our big fish that everyone likes to catch and eat, more than it might affect our herbivores, which is like our rabbitfish and what people don't like to eat. So by splitting up the data like this, we can start to really disentangle what pressures are impacting what parts of our fish communities. And then I've pulled out some data that is just for East Geographe Bay. Again, stable. I wonder how many times I'll say stable in this talk. But this is just looking at total biomass of fish on the left and then the number of species that we see on the right. And ever so slight increases, but really this is a very nice, happy, healthy community that we've got here. I didn't know that had a sound. We'll just leave that. So the other asset that I wanted to talk about today was our seagrass communities. So this is work that is in addition to what Kath and ECU and all the other stakeholders have been doing. So Kath's talked about the shallow sites, which are these blue ones in this map, but we also have long-term monitoring sites in the mid and the deep sections of Geographe Bay. Again, the deep, what is really cool about this, I think, is that the mid and the deep sites are reflecting what's happening in the shallow as well. It's this nice, happy, healthy seagrass community that we monitor in we monitor in the same way that Kath mentioned. We have these tapes, and we take down little squares and we count to 100 many times. So this plot up is just the mean shoot density. So this is how many little seagrass shoots are in each of these squares, and our monitoring of this was started back in 2015, and it's pretty much as straight a line as you get on scientific plots. Just going to do it again. And then this is canopy height. So we measure how high the average length of these seagrasses are across these transects. And I've included the shallow seagrass sites on here as well, just to kind of, because they overlapped quite a lot. But this kind of information is cool because we can take that count data and this height data and we can get an idea of biomass or exactly how much seagrass is really in this area. And this is important when we're thinking about the fish or the organisms that are living within this seagrass. So more seagrass, the thicker it is, the higher it is. It's really what we use to indicate how happy and healthy it is, and how much food and shelter it is providing for all the animals that live within it. So that was the 2 monitoring programs that I wanted to touch on today. We do have a suite of other programs that look at benthic communities and invertebrates and water quality and a heap of other things, but they're not quite as established and they haven't been done as consistently as our fish and our seagrass monitoring has. But that's definitely something we're trying to change moving forward. We're trying to take a really holistic approach. And really, Kath touched on it a little bit as well, speaking about the resilience of this system. So we monitor to check on the health of the system, to check on the biodiversity of the system and to conserve that system. But really for me as well, we're looking to promote or at least assess the resilience of this system, especially in today with climate change being such a relevant factor at play. And resilience is quite a cool concept, and I wanted to share this little description that I heard not long ago, which I think encapsulates it really well. So I was up in Perth and I was pulling into Cot, I was about to go for a surf, and as I pulled into the car park, there was a lady in the car next to me and she was yelling at her kids in the back seat. And she goes, "You just push me and push me and push me until you push me over the edge." And I thought, well, what a brilliant way to describe resilience. And that's exactly what it is, and that is exactly what these monitoring programs target. We look at the indicators, this is the species or the organisms that are being pushed. We look at the pressures that are acting on them, this is what's doing the pushing, and we see how much these species or these organisms can take before they start to collapse or degrade. So that's the goal of our monitoring programs, and this summer we have a few things that we're targeting. We're going to target our deep reefs. So I define deep as anything we can't scuba dive on. And to do that, we're going to look at the finfish, look at the fish communities again, using those stereographs. And we're also going to have a look at the benthic communities or the habitat formings, the seaweeds down there. And we use AUVs, so these are like underwater robots that we fly around. It is actually really cool. A few other things we're doing is we're going to be working on the intertidal invertebrate community. So a few of you may have noticed that in the early mornings the tides are super low at the moment, and they're going to get lower and lower over the next few weeks, and we take this opportunity to go and sample. So it's actually, I think in 2 or 3 weeks time, the team will be down here. We go out on these platforms when it's super low tide and we walk around and we look at snails, basically, is what we do. And then the other thing we are aiming to get done this summer is focusing a little bit more on that west coast and looking at the shallow reef. So we want to look at the fish. We'll be using stereo doves, which is very similar cameras that we swim around, and also the benthic and the invertebrate communities, which we're hoping to all get done whilst scuba diving. But in addition to all this monitoring, we also have some research goals. Another thing Kath mentioned was that temperature and climate change is the key player here, and it's a trend that we're seeing across all of our marine parks in WA. Temperature is the significant impact at that broad scale. So we at DBCA try and do a lot of research to complement our monitoring to dig a bit deeper and really start disentangling these pressures and again trying to address that resilience of the system. So Kath also mentioned we will be creating a satellite map of Geographe Bay this summer. So it's complementary to our seagrass monitoring data. We have those counts, that really specific data, and we want to use remotely sensed images to get this big picture of what's going on. So hopefully by the end of it, I'll have a nice map with a few different colours, and I can tell you exactly where all the seagrasses are within Geographe Bay, if it all goes to plan. And then a few other key research themes that I'm particularly interested in. They're again focused on climate change and marine heat waves and this blue carbon. So seagrasses are epic at storing carbon, but there's also there's work being done to see how seaweeds contribute to this space as well. And we have a heap of seaweed and a heap of seagrass both in the Nyari Capes, which makes this a really unique, gives us a unique opportunity to study this system. And the other thing I think is really cool about the Capes is that it is Western Australia's one of its last really pristine temperate reef regions. So we have this massive transition zone that kind of starts in the tropics and comes all the way down to the capes, and it does go from these beautiful coral reefs to beautiful kelp forests, but it is this transition. And so climate change and ocean warming is impacting down our coast in different ways. And to me, the capes is really the last stronghold of temperate reefs that we have here, which means it's unique. And it also means that when we start seeing impacts of climate change down here, WA is in a lot of trouble, and the south coast is in a lot of trouble. So really, to me, the capes is like the canary in the coal mine for climate change impacts on our core water reef systems. That's where these blue carbon research projects kind of fit in. We want to know how much blue carbon is being stored here, where is it getting transported, and all those types of things. And it also feeds into this research theme number 2, which I'm particularly interested in, which is deep reef refuge. So the idea is that our deeper reefs are less exposed to temperature changes, they're less exposed to the impacts of climate change, and could these regions provide a refuge for the rest of the coast or of our shallow ecosystems? And that is the question that we'll be trying to answer there. So that is it from me. I've left up my email there, but I've also plugged the Great Southern Reef a few times. So this is a side project for me, and I work with colleagues. We work very hard to try and raise the awareness of the Great Southern Reef. So yeah, be sure to check out. If you liked the footage that I showed, be sure to check out these ones, and there's plenty more to where that came from.
Well, thank you so much, Sarah.